My wife and I are in Italy. We're traveling around we're traveling around to different places and we're meeting Human Garage on their world tour. So we're sort of spending 3 days in one country, 3 or 4 days with Human Garage, and then we're traveling around. Right now we're in Italy and we're in this town called Saturnia is actually how it's pronounced. And there's a hot springs, and we're actually staying at a resort where the hot springs originate from, and then they flow down a river, and there's this majestic outdoor area with blue waterfalls. And it really got me thinking. I'm going to show you guys what that looks like in a second. I took a video, I'm going to share it on the screen, but it really got me thinking about, because there's signs everywhere saying that there's natural mineral water and it's been used for healing for centuries, probably longer than that, right? But this is an old Roman place and they had Roman baths, and people used to come here when they had ailments, illnesses, sicknesses, and they would get into the waters and it would help them heal. And if that's completely accepted, and it was completely accepted back then, there's so much that we have yet to discover about what this body absorbs within the environment. Because most of the time we're just thinking of us as individual entities. And even things like earthing, grounding, right? That was just, quote, discovered in recent terms in 1998 by Clint Ober. And that was because he was working on, I believe he was in the telecommunications business, so he understood how electricity worked, in particular frequencies going through cables, right? And he correlated that with it coming up into the body. So this is where we're at. Now there's things like this happening all over the world. This isn't exactly where we're staying. We're staying at the source of this, but this is all thermal waters. It's blue. Let's go back to the beginning there. I'll get some more close-up videos of that. My point is, going out into nature makes us powerful. It connects us with the elements. We are the elements. Now, how does that apply, right? How does that apply? So many of you guys know my story. I used to compete. I used to own gyms, and I was able to win competitions without training in a physical fashion. And what I was figured out later on is that I was spending a lot of time in nature. And that's why I have this obsession about finding about how we connect with nature. Here's another fact. So I mentioned earthing. Back in late 1700s, going into 1800s, we as a human society, like with our advancement in this current civilization, we didn't know that electricity traveled through the body the way that we have a gnosis of it traveling through the body now, which is through electrical nerve impulses, right? So we have a good understanding, a good comprehension right now that the brain is producing electricity, and that's flowing through nerves, through axons and dendrites, right? And there's this sort of looks like a wire brush connection at the end of the axon. There's a dendrite, and the electricity communicates with other dendrites, and that's what creates our entire mind. Essentially, it creates our brain. It creates our ability to connect all these sensations together and facilitate some sort of meaning with life. Back in the late 1700s going into 1800s, scientists were discovering that, hey, we think that there's an electrical charge going through the body, but we can't make sense of it. And all the other scientists were sort of laughing these guys out of the room because they were saying, how can electricity travel through the body if the body's made up of what they understood at the time, tubes? So they knew what veins and arteries were because they can actually see them with the physical eye. but electricity going through the body was hard for them to understand. It took about 150 years before science started to actually adapt what these earlier scientists were saying. So they had already long died, the original people that were working on this, before science as a community and then the entire world at large started to accept that science. So when we think about science, we think that there's like all of these scientists working all over the world and they're all collaborating together to give us a grand unified picture of what us as a human species know to date. And in theory, that is what we're led to believe, and it almost seems like that's how it should be. That's how it would be if we're a human intelligent race on this planet figuring things out. We should be using the data and the knowledge of 7.5, 5, 10, however many billions of people are on this planet, whatever the number is now, and hopefully it's not convoluted. I don't know, maybe they're making it up, but it's not that way. So yeah, that's what this comment is saying. It's not that way. There's not collaboration. There's not cohesiveness. And there's lots of strife and there's lots of politics in science because science is governed, it's managed by humans. And humans are very good at separating identity. Why do we do that? And please ask me any questions about any of this because I'd love to go on a tangent on all this. But the reason why we do that, why are we good at being individuals? Because, and I'm going to go on an amazing tangent right now. The reason why humans are so naturally gifted, it's almost like our mode of operating. It's our standard operating procedure to be biased to separation, right? So we're primarily a separate human. That's how we function. And this idea of unification, of collaboration, of us is typically harder, and I'm going to make an argument that it's more advanced, but it's typically harder for a human to accept and adapt and allow for the evolution of essentially our species. And the reason for that is because separateness is a stage that allows us to strengthen ourselves as an individual so that when our species evolves, or when the world, I should say, or even the universe or the system that makes us up, if that system is made up of a bunch of individually strong units, then the whole will be more strong and complete. And so we're in the stage right now of our conscious development of gaining the wisdom, the experience, the emotions of an individual self. We're an individual self, like a cell inside of our body, but we're a self within a grander version of ourself. Just like the cells in our body are individual units, they live, they defecate, they have a job to do, they are replicating, and they are biased to not die, and just like us, and they make up us, right? And when there's something they need, they send up a signal, they send up a pain, they send up a prayer to the grander self, which is us, and then we itch, or we get up, or we stretch, or we do a fascial maneuver, or we do something that satisfies the desire of the cell. So did I go into the healing waters? If so, how did it feel? Yes, we've been in many times. And actually what I showed you guys is 2 kilometers away from the resort that we're in now. So at this resort, it's called, is it called that? It's called Terme di Saturnia. Saturnia is probably how it's said in Italian. Terme di Saturnia. And at this resort is where the origin of that stream, it goes about 2 kilometers away from here, into this cascading waterfalls. The reason why I showed you the cascading waterfalls instead of the resort is amazing because there's tons of algae in the pool that the water goes. And this pool is doing, I think, 5,000 gallons a minute. And so it's a gigantic pool, and every 2 minutes there's fresh water in it because it's just coming up, and then it goes down, and it goes from probably there's like 20 huge resort style pools. So if you imagine like any old resort like next to the ocean where there's water everywhere, there's 20 pools, well, that would all be water from the earth, and people come here and they bathe in it, and they've been doing that for hundreds of years, known, probably thousands. Back to what I was saying about us as individuals, because I'm going to be getting back to the water, right? And the reason why I'm doing that is because I'm setting up a platform for us to realize that we're great at being individuals. And so the way that we think about our body is that it's just us, that it's made, our skin is made to protect us from outside. And that's not actually the wisdom of our body. The wisdom of our body is to interact with the external environment, because this external environment is just a story that us, these human that we are, this body that we're inhabiting now, this body has developed the capacity to identify as an individual, even though that's not actually how it's happening. Just like we are in the capacity to realize and perceive linear time. We perceive a past, a present, and a future. And that essentially also is not really how it's happening. That's all just a perception that we're really good at to make sense of this reality, which is much, much, much bigger than our perceptions. You guys all know the analogy of a fish doesn't know it's in water, right? But because we can see from a bird's eye view of that fish, where we can see the water and we can see what's not water, there's a whole bunch with us that is not so natural for us to observe, especially if we went to schools where the teacher was telling us what to think, and we went home and we watched TV, and the TV was programming us what to believe and how to be, and then we talked to our parents who are also in the same system. This is the regular gnosis. Your explanation makes me think of the collective as how we grow up from baby to adulthood. Yeah, so it's all a fractal of each other, and you can make a lot of correlations with that. You can even make correlations with that within the development of a country. So traveling around the world, I started recognizing that like Asia has grandparent type energy. Europe has parent type energy. United States has teenager type energy. And it's very clear as a society, as a culture, where the priorities are, right? In America, it's big screen TVs, expensive, materialistic stuff. It's identifying with the physical body. This is what the teenagers and young adults are prioritizing. You go to Asia, they're over the physical body. They're working on energy. They're in the parks doing qigong in the morning. They're walking around in robes. They're not really robes, but the material that they make clothes out of is not made like this. It's not made to cage, number one, but accentuate the body, which is like what we do over in the West. This is all made to it's made to advance the perception of the body. Over there, it's almost just like it's essentially just like a sheet that is put over you and wrapped around you, and it has a different function that is more practical to our body, connecting again with the elements. This clothes, socks, underwear, shorts, those are all breaking your body down into parts. A shirt is made to cover the upper body. The pants are made to cover the lower body. This is how we think over here. We're like a child going through school, needing to break everything down into parts so that we can even start to begin to understand the whole. It's just we forgot that the whole exists, and we're just so focused on parts. Look at our science here. It's like, let's cut this up into a small part so that we can understand it. Let's take that away. Let's put it into a petri dish and let's do a bunch of stuff to it. It's like completely out of its natural environment. Completely. Like completely. Not to mention it's not in its natural environment. So it's away from all of the components that made it whole, and it's being shined on by light that is completely broken and just one narrow part of the light spectrum. It's nowhere near close to sunlight, which is way more than for seeing, right? The light indoors is visible light makes up less than 1% of the light spectrum. This is very important to understand. Visible light makes up, and I'm just going to keep on going on tangents. I need to pay attention to these questions. Thank you guys for the comments. Love the idea of cells praying. I'm going to get back to lights. Totally believe that. The thing with light is that when you're indoors, so it's the sun's setting right now. How long should we ground every day? That's a good question. Ideally, it's every day, at least a moment, because there is a bit of it that travels at the speed of light, which is also another, we don't know. That's like another, like, let's break this all apart and reduce it down to a mechanistic way. And anyways, electricity gets into you from the earth in an instant. However, a good marker, if you were to shoot for one, would be 30 to 45 minutes. Ra, you are so uniquely strange on a cellular level. I'm so happy for you that you are touring the world. You are interacting with different vibrations, traveling through different human systems. Yes, yes. Right now, if I blasted as much light that I could in here, like if I got studio lights and there's like 1, 2, 3, 4 lamps on me right now, and I made it perceptively brighter than outside underneath a tree, like in the shade, where I could see everything inside. The amount of lux, which is the measurement, it's like weight, but for light. So like weight would be like pounds, right? So lux is like it's a measurement for the brightness of light. The amount of lux that would be indoors underneath this light that's made for seeing compared to going outside underneath a tree is like, it's tremendous, like hundreds or thousands of times brighter underneath a tree in the shade than it is in a well-lit room. Even though it seems much brighter in the room, it's because this light is so weak relative to what light is, where light is a whole huge spectrum outside of visible light. So when you take a cell and you put it within an environment where there's lights shining on it, that is just like a very small fraction of the actual light. Light is one of the most important things that influence the behavior of anything, especially a living biological cell. light is completely influencing the behavior of that. And so if you take it out of its light environment, you are really changing the way that it's going to respond to a certain test. Not to mention, there's things like the placebo effect, there's things like the double slit experiment, where we can absolutely see that a human's intention influences the results of a test. And let's bring it back to water, okay? So when you go into these thermal waters, it's giving healing powers, whatever that means. But I see that because I go into hot springs everywhere that I go. And it's the same thing. Like we hear stories of mothers when their children are sick, they literally go to the hot springs, fill up buckets and they take it home and have their child bathe in hot spring water or spring water just in general, because they know that that's going to give life force back to the child. Our skin is not made to block out the world. Our skin is made, it's porous. It's made to interact with the world. Melanin, which is on our skin, in our skin, it's a part of our skin. It's also a part of our nervous system. It's a part of our brain. It's part of our eyes. Melanin is not made to block light. Mela, from melanin, the mela word literally means black or dark. That's what that root mela means, all right? And black is actually black because no light bounces off of it. So if you have a color, so like this is black. Why is it black? It's not just black because this is the color black. Again, back to reductionist, simplest, simplified science. We're taught like, this is the color black. This is orangish red, and this is brown. This is what we're taught, like this is brown. But the actual truth of this is that this is kind of like brown with green on the inside, but the actual truth of this is that this thing is everything except for brown. It's absorbing all of the light except for brown, and brown is bouncing out, and that's what our eyes are picking up. And then we label it as color. This kiwi has no idea of the color brown. Maybe it has understood the human language, I'm not sure, but it's beyond the labeling of color. But we label things so that we can understand things, like I said, like individually understand things. So this is brown, but actually this thing is everything except for brown. It's pulling in and absorbing all of the light except for the brown part of the spectrum, and then we see that. This is doing the same thing for orange on this side and red on this side. Because white light is what? White is all of the colors. Now, back to this. What is this? You guys, I'm sure, have heard that white is the presence of all colors and black is the absence of all colors. That's one way to explain what the difference between white and black is. White is the presence of all colors, but again, color is less than 1% of light. So us breaking down light into color, things that we can see have color, right? That's not what light is in its totality. But just speaking of color, black is the absence of all color, which means that white light hits this and no light comes out of it. It absorbs all of the light. It attracts all of the light. It's also why football players put black lines right here. They put black lines right here so that when they look up at the sky to catch the football, the light is being attracted here, and this huge black stripe as opposed to the pupil. It's pulling light down back to the melanin in our hair, our skin, our eyes. Mela, black stuff in our body. This is made to pull light. It's made to absorb light. If it was made to block light, we would be like waxy, shiny things that were very pale and wouldn't absorb any light. So highly melanated people have technology within them to absorb light. If you're pale, what do you have? You have freckles. What is a freckle? A freckle is the melanocytes, which are the melanin cells. There's not so many of them in pale people because they're, let's just speak from an evolutionary standpoint, they're evolved. And again, evolution is another one of those things that may or may not have happened the way that we were taught, but they evolved in an area of the earth where there's not much light. Melanocytes in pale people gather together. They clump together because there's not much melanin. There's not much melanin within a pale, low melanated person's skin because the melanocytes are clumping together to form a little bit of a dark spot like this. So I'm actually half pale-skinned person. My father is European and my mother is Filipino, so I have attributes from both of those races of people. So I do have some freckles, I do have wavy hair because my father had curly hair, my mother had straight hair. That also has to do with where you are in the earth. I'll get to that in a second because that's a little bit interesting as well. But if you're pale, you have freckles because the freckles are better at pulling in light. So your melanocytes actually are clumping together in form of a freckle so that it's more effective at grabbing light. And it's more effective at grabbing light because it needs light. We need light. Just like we need our feet on the earth, we need to be in water that is not polluted or sterilized. We need to be within living ecological systems because that is what we are. Really quickly on the hair, straight hair, if you guys have ever had long hair, like I have, like I know, like my hair goes down below my butt, it's like a blanket. It's a blanket on me. So long, straight hair is made to cover you. It falls down over your body. And so people that are from climates where there's a need for protection, should I use the word protection in that concept? Need for, it's going to heat the body. It's going to be a membrane around the body to cover it and maintain its heat. It's about heat, which is really, heat is one of the part of the spectrum of light that is not visible light. Everything that we know of as heat is really light. Everything here is light, but heat is infrared light. And so the hair keeps the infrared light within our body. If you are from a very, very, very hot climate, you're going to have curly hair, and that curly hair is going to stand up because that's going to be radiating the heat. It's going to be pulling the heat away from the body. And the way that it does that is because it's going to be moist from the sweat, and that sweat is going to be spread out amongst the hair, and it's going to increase the evaporation in hair that's coming out like this. And so that's why Some people have curly hair, some people have straight hair. Same thing with nose size. Like if you are needing to cool the body, you've got wide nose. If you're needing to keep that radiant heat in, you've got short, skinnier nose that's going to produce heat. The nose is really our breathing instrument, not the mouth. And so I just took in air because when you speak, you're actually speaking a lot through the mouth. And the way that I fix that is I make sure to speak pretty much as long as I can so I can extend the exhales, and then the inhales happen relatively quickly, but I try to not inhale as quick as I can, which is what you normally try and do when you speak. And it's even better if you can inhale through the nose and speak through the mouth. If objects absorb all colors except for one, some, as in our brown kiwi example, is that true for humans too? We look appear like the things we aren't absorbing. We look appear like the things we aren't absorbing. So here's a crazy one. Have you guys ever noticed that people's dogs look like them? I'll just let you guys think back. When you go walking around and you see somebody and their dogs, you're going to see that they look similar, they act similar. It's almost like they are the same thing. That's because they are within the same field. They're sharing the energy. They're not even eating the same things. So you can't, it's not like where family members start to look and behave the same. When you're talking about a human and a dog, they're completely different species, and they literally start to act and look like each other. Why is that? How can that be? There's a study, which I need to find it. I wasn't planning on quoting this study. The scientist is like, I could probably look it up and actually find the study right now if I do this really quickly. So this study it's where they shine light on salamander eggs into frogs. So they shine light. I want to say that even the person that invented DNA, who's the person that discovered DNA? Who is the person that discovered DNA? There's a whole bunch of names. Watson and Crick. He's the biologist. Let me see. Let me just Watson, salamander, frog eggs. All right, I can't find the study. After all that talk and crap about studies. Anyways, in one particular study, now I'm going to use science to validate my claims. So yes, very hypocritical, right? Which is what this whole experience is. So there's studies where there's researchers testing out light, and there's a whole bunch of crazy studies with light. But one of them, they either took salamander eggs or frog eggs. I forget which one. I should know this. And they shined light through. So if it's a salamander egg, they have a picture of a frog and they shine light through. I think they were frog eggs that they showed a picture of a salamander to, or put a picture of a salamander, shine light through the salamander, and the frog eggs turned into salamanders. And then they mated, and then they just completely became salamanders. Or it was the other way around. It was salamanders into frogs. And they also did the same thing with fruits and diseased fruits. They put a picture of a healthy fruit, of the same type of fruit on top, shine lights through it, and the fruit becomes not diseased. And this is really important when it comes to our perspective of life. And I was talking about humans and dogs. If they're sharing the same frequency, sharing the same field, our bodies actually morph into what we are resonating into the field. I've heard tons of people share stories about their bodies physically changing because they had an intention to grow a bigger jaw, grow a smaller nose, grow bigger boobs. If you intend on that greatly enough, you're going to have impact on the field, especially if you have power. And that power comes into connection, right? That's alignment. It's our physical body's alignment with our heart, with our mind, with our emotions, with our gut intelligence. And if we're able to maintain that alignment, we are able to have access to more power to influence other fields of energy. The HeartMath Institute, here's another study for you. The HeartMath Institute hooked a bunch of people in apartments up to machines and started measuring their emotional frequencies. And they started realizing that the people were sharing fields of emotional energy, and that if one person's stressed and anxious, another person's going to be stressed and anxious. If one person's happy, it's influencing another person. Then they asked the question, who is doing the influencing? Because that's very important to understand, to integrate this. Who's actually the ones doing who's the one doing influences? And I believe they made up the term psychophysiological coherence. So if you hear that term, psychophysiological coherence, it's essentially the alignment of the mind and the heart is what they have defined that term as. And the ones that were in most alignment had the most power to influence the fields of other people. And I would also go so far, because when you talk about emotions, we start to reduce and separate the emotions, right? And we say, this is shame and this is joy. And shame is worse than joy. Or guilt is worse than anger. Just a little bit worse. And anger is worse than acceptance, right? If you've seen the levels of consciousness. And that's what happens when you break things into separate parts. Now you can compare and contrast them. But really, it's all made up of light. It's all made up of what's popular to talk about now is love. It's just all made up of opposites, really. So back to the colors. Let's say this is yellow. What did I just mention? It was yellow, and at the same time, it's everything except for yellow. Excuse me, I've been wanting to do that this whole time. All right. So it's yellow, and at the same time, it's the opposite of yellow. It's the same thing because light, this is all light. And so light hits it, it takes some and it leaves some. But this is 100% light, and it's made up of minerals, which is also light. It's also made up of carbohydrates, which is also light, and it's also made up of hydrogen, which is also light. That's what carbon. Did I say carbohydrates? I meant to say carbon. Carbon dioxide gets broken by the tree and it releases oxygen, right? So it's holding on to carbon, it's taking oxygen and hydrogen from the water that it brings in, and it puts it into this, and it forms a carbohydrate. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, with some minerals from the earth. It's yellow, and it's also the opposite of yellow. Back to emotions. Because everything, I've heard this said in so many different ways. There's love, and then there's the seeking for love. And everything is within that spectrum. You're either at pure resonant love frequency, or there's a distraction of that, and you're like this color, you're both guilty, your feeling of guilt or shame, and you're seeking, you're attracted to being accepted. You're attracting the opposite of that. And so we can look at emotions as a broken part of love that's seeking to reharmonize itself. It's seeking the opposite of nature. And so this is why there's so much people that are talking about like loving, giving people with narcissists and how they match up together. And they're trying to say like the narcissist is bad, and without really understanding how that dynamic works. If like we're here to match with each other and opposites attract. And so a union is going to come. Now within that union, now it's the challenge of making that work so that you both have full and complete love. Because even somebody who's giving to the point where they give themselves too much is fulfilling a emptiness that they have within inside themselves. And somebody who's taking is going to fulfill that emptiness for them. And they're going to be pulling away from each other. And within that arrangement, if you can find harmony, then you can operate as a unit. Doctor, yes. This looks familiar, and the reason why I couldn't remember it is because I can't even pronounce this name. Gergiev. I don't even know how to pronounce that, and that's why I have no memory of it. I couldn't pull a scientist's name because I can't even pronounce this. But I can't even pronounce your name either. Whatever this Bien Cadistler, I'll just try. And he's talking about, you guys can see, Dr. P-J-O-T-R G-A-R-J-A-G-E-V. I know it's relatively easy to say if I heard somebody say it, but I'm seeing it in writing right now. But I've heard it so many times that I know that if I heard it, I could say it. That's my memory of this name. But anyways, but that's the researcher for the frog embryos. Thank you for... All right, say Gurdjieff. It's Gurdjieff, right? Yeah. All right, thanks for that. All right, the frog embryo experiment by Gurdjieff. That sound. I don't really feel comfortable saying that. But look that up, because that allows you to realize that there's more going on besides us being individual entities. Our dogs are starting to look like us based on the field of energy that we create together. Salamander eggs and frog eggs can swap literal animal species based on light shining through a picture. Actually, I don't think it was a picture. This has been like 10 years, all right, since I heard of this experiment. I don't think it was a picture. I think they just put them next to each other with a piece of quartz separating them, because it can't be glass, because glass breaks light. And they put them in two different units, and they shined light from one side that went through the one species into another. That's actually what it was. The picture was for the plants, but for the eggs, they actually had the two different species in a container separated by a piece of quartz, and they shined it through because the quartz didn't break the light, where glass does break light. So this whole thing started with interacting with the elements, right? And getting into springs in nature and really recognizing that we are connected to nature. And hold on, I'm just thumbing around with my computer right now. And so light, when you guys look at a piece of glass, so if you go outside on a sunny day and you look at your house or your car and the light's hitting it, what do you see? You see a reflection of the sun. What does that tell you? It tells you that a whole bunch of light is going into the glass, some of it's going through, and some of it's bouncing back out. And if you imagine light as like a spectrum, when you get like a light spectrum reader, you're going to see that if it's full, it's going to be full of most of the spectrum. If it's broken, there's going to be massive peaks and spikes in the spectrum of light, which means that some of the light is missing and some of the light is in abundance. If it's broken, like if it's going through glass, it's going to have massive valleys in there, which means it's different than the light that we're harmonized to, which is natural sunlight. So glass breaks light. What that means is that it reflects some of the spectrum back out and it lets some of it in. And that's why getting sun through glass isn't the greatest. It could still be beneficial. I'm not arguing that. It definitely is beneficial because you can see that people have happier moods in houses with lots of windows. That's why people that have the means to put lots of open windows within a house. And it costs more money to do that, but it's worth it for people because it makes them feel better to see light, to be lit up naturally, and also to see outside. But let's not forget that light coming through glass is broken. This whole thing is making me think of Avatar, The Last Airbender. Do you know I just watched that? Carol and I just watched it. I think we started with Korra because we moved to Mount Shasta we don't really watch TV, but we moved to Mount Shasta during that whole thing that happened in 2020 and 2021 and 2022. And we would work all day and then there was literally nothing to do. Like nobody was going out. You guys remember that time, but we were working all day, and to decompress, we would watch an episode or two, and it was interesting. And so the Airbender series are amazing. It's no surprise it wasn't developed here. And the lessons in there are great. And it's coming from the lands that were grandmother energy that I was speaking of earlier. It's not coming from our land, which is about seduction and lack and gratification. That's what's fueling our society. Materialism, capitalism, competition, that's what's running, that's the engine of our society, and we can handle it. We're young, and that's like younger people are able to withstand greater pressure in certain things like that. And when you get older, you just have more wisdom and you realize that the effort isn't necessary. Even though the effort is necessary for our growth, it's necessary for us to understand the lessons, because a lot of lessons come with us going in one direction and realizing that's not the right way, and going in another direction and that's not the right way, lifting something up and down metaphorically 100,000 times before we realize that we could have just done this one thing once. So we're in the process. Again, it's not one thing. It is one thing and it is its opposite. So I'm kind of laying out, like, I see our society as doing a lot of things that are wasteful and energy consuming and not extremely efficient, and it's necessary for our growth. It's necessary. And then we've got the eastern part of our world that's beyond that, and they're wiser, if I were to just put it simply. And they're over it. They're over the physical, satisfying the physical, and they're 1 foot in etherical, 1 foot in this physical. And that's where a lot of the medicine of the other realms came from. And now it's sort of spreading out into the world, just like Western philosophy and influence is spreading out into the world. And we're going into cultures that never knew about materialism, and we're instantaneously flipping that switch on for those cultures, and they get Western influence. They get McDonald's set up on their island, they get trees cut down, they get factory farming, they get fire retardant sprayed on their clothes, they get plastic. You know what's crazy? And I do feel like I'm rambling. You know what's crazy is that I was hearing somebody talk about India, and he explained, I think he was either Indian or not, but he explained that the reason why there's so much litter in India and there's just garbage literally everywhere is because he says that people unwrap things and then they just throw it on the ground. And I was like, okay, but why do they do that? And he said, well, the reason why they do that is because they're ignorant. And I'm like, well, yeah, but why else? And he said, well, everything used to be wrapped in banana leaves. And that's what you did. You just threw it on the ground. So there really was no need to have garbages every like 10 feet like we do in the West. But then there was Western influence, or let's say colonizer, because it was probably British, right? Colonizer influence came in and they started to shift the culture, and the culture adapted plastic wrapping instead of banana leaves. I should be quoting the next word, because it was safer. It's more sanitary if you wrap it in plastic than wrap it in plant matter. And so culturally, they haven't adapted to what you do once you unwrap it. And he said, so they're just ignorant. And I was like, yeah, I can agree with you on that. And also, there's something larger at play that contributed to this. And it's just interesting to think about what happened as a result of us going in there and making things more technologically advanced for people, telling them that it's better. And it really just led to pollution everywhere, like we have in our country. And this is just how it is. This is us learning how to adapt. And we're going to get some injuries, right? When you're older, there's some aches and pains from your life, and you know not to do things because you did it 100 times when you were 20 and it didn't hurt you. And when you were 35, you started feeling it. And when you're 45, you just don't even do it once. You do it completely different now because you've learned your lessons, but those pains never go away. And that's what we're going through as a society. That's what we're going through as a country. How is the looking like your pet similar to the kiwi being brown example? Somehow this is all the same stream of consciousness. The looking like your pet and the kiwi being brown example, I don't think I was really making connection with that. I think I was going from salamanders turning into frog eggs to the you looking like the pet thing. The color connection I was correlating with emotions being both positive and negative, right? We can't just look at somebody who's in a state of rage and say that person's bad because he's angry. Well, yes, he's yellow, and he's also seeking the opposite of that to diffuse, that will diffuse the anger and equate to love. And it's up to those around him to recognize that, and hopefully himself to recognize that and to figure out what the match is to bring him back to a state of unity. But us operating that way is really going to be a complete shift in culture, because right now, even in universities, even within this, I'm using words, right? And I'm breaking things down. And so it's hard to even explain this, that everything is whatever it is, and it's the opposite of it. Like, this is the law of polarity. Hot and cold are opposites in one sense, but they're also both temperature. They're also both an expression of what we know of as temperature. So they're essentially different expressions of the same thing. And whatever is hot has an opposite, it's pulled in the opposite direction, like a magnet, right? So magnets have a positive and negative end, and they're literally the same, they're the same piece, has both positive and negative end. And if you break that piece, that second, and the two pieces are also both going to have a positive and negative end. And so every emotion operates like that. Within the emotion is a attraction, a calling, a longing for whatever is missing between that emotion and full light love. And us being able to recognize that within ourselves will then allow us to recognize that within others. So if we have a tendency to be cold and distant and walled up, we're really seeking the opposite of that: openness, softness, flowiness, and putting ourselves into those situations, finding partners, relationships, business relationships that match us. I spoke of partnerships, but even like building a team where we're figuring out the different aspects of ourselves. This is where things like astrology, human design, it even gets way more dynamic when you start looking at that different aspects, because it goes much deeper than just simple emotions. It goes into, that's much deeper, and I want to go into that mostly because I can't really speak on that. Thanks for your participation, everybody. Ta-ta, bye-bye.